and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. If it's Thursday, if we're here, it's Thursday, right? If we're here, it's Thursday. Thursday, 12 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. That's Robert Hilliard. I'm Whitnie Wiley, and we are here with you talking all things leadership. And today we're going to be talking about leading through conflict, or how you can lead through conflict. Because, Robert, why?
Because whenever you have two people in a room together or two people talking, there will be conflict. Usually.
There will be conflict, right? The simple fact is conflict isn't bad in and of itself. It just is a disagreement between people or ideas or divergent approaches, whatever, right? The problem isn't the conflict. The problem is how we display that conflict, how we express it, right? How we express those disagreements. And the other thing that is the problem is our desire to avoid it, to stay in our comfort zones. And so we don't want to deal with the disagreements, which a lot of times we are exaggerating, or, in our head that there's this big gulf. We don't want to deal with it, so we're going to avoid it. What happens then? It piles on top of each other, right? This little thing and the next one, and next thing you know, you're blowing up over something that doesn't make any sense. And so we want to talk with you today about how you can move through the conflict, how you can navigate it, manage it, right? And you may or may not resolve it. Resolution, in my mind, and I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on this, Robert. Resolution of conflict, in my mind, is a subset of managing conflict, right? I think you can do some work to prevent it, that the escalation and the blowing up part, and then you can do some work to manage it.
Right. I think that this is one of my favorite topics because
you're a conflict creator.
I am. No. We all are, right? We all are.
I'm not.
Yeah, except you. But it's one of my favorite topics because I have yet to meet a manager. It hasn't happened that said, I don't mind conflict. I every time I meet a manager, or I'm working with a manager or an executive, when conflict comes up, it doesn't matter how high they are up on the org chart, there is usually this, they try to, they don't like conflict. Now,
they're trying to avoid it, right? Yeah.
And sometimes they try to avoid it when they're high on the org chart by being so confrontational and aggressive that it never comes their way. That's still avoidance. Those of you that think that you're being effective, you're not. That's still avoidance. You're just being so difficult that people avoid you. So that's just your way of avoiding conflict. So they may think that they're being effective at dealing with conflict because conflict never, I always get my way.
Because they don't see it, right? They don't see it because everyone's afraid of them and sort of making things the way that they want. That's not the case. So, right. Yeah.
So in my opinion, I have a little scale that I use. You're still on the lower end of that scale. Just because you're using those other things to compensate so you don't have conflict, that doesn't mean you're good at it. And so to me, resolving conflict is dealing with things. I like to use conflict management, difficult conversations. I like to combine that with consensus, right? And so the consensus is having a solution that people can live with. It's not having a solution that everyone agrees with 100%. It's having a solution that everyone can live with. It's okay. It may have been a 3, now it's a 6, or now it's a 7. I can work with that then we can have a conversation later on to make it better. So that's my long-winded definition of conflict resolution.
So I think we're pretty much on the same page. Again, I would see conflict, the resolution of conflict, sort of as a subset of the bigger picture of managing
Of
the
course.
conflict. But I think the same thing. And if you can, one, start from a place where, with what Robert said, which is where there are two or more people. First of all, I don't even know that you need two or more people. We have inner conflicts, right? So we have conflicts all by ourselves. Conflicts in our values and our behaviors, right? Conflicts in the things that we believe and the things that we say. So we've got inner conflicts that create its own set of turmoils. But certainly where there are two or more people, there are bound to be disagreements. They're bound to be, divergent thoughts and approaches and ideas. How you choose to express those and whether you choose to escalate those differences is, I think, the key to being able to be a leader and someone who can lead through conflict and help others to navigate the conflict space. And so you can do some work on the front end to sort of prevent the escalation. And then you can manage the situation when the blow up happens, right? So if you don't prevent the escalation and the blow up happens, whether it is an epic blow up or just it, maybe gets a little out of hand, what are some strategies to help through that? And then on the other side, and this is one of those things where I am, a big believer in lessons, right? Every experience is an opportunity to learn and grow and to look for the silver linings. And we can talk about that. The silver linings in conflict. There are some positives that come from having conflict with others or yourself. And if you are willing, you have to be willing. If you are willing to see it that way, it can help you not want to take the avoidance approach, because in the end, avoidance doesn't really work.
It doesn't. I think a good place to start is to understand, and we can dig into this a little bit later, the different types of conflict, and that helps you really decide what you want to focus on. But
go for it.
Okay, so let's talk about it. So I tend to think that there are, and I've done some research on this, as you know, I always do. There are 4 different types of conflict.
I would be surprised if you didn't.
Yeah. Can't help myself. So the first one is relationship conflict. That is the first one. Those are also called interpersonal conflict. And those are those personality clashes. People don't get along. You can't really figure out why. Maybe they just don't like each other. Maybe there are some political things in there. Maybe there is some other issues that are involved in there. You just can't put your finger on it. The example I usually give is 2 siblings with different personalities. They just don't get along. They argue about nearly everything. The second, which is the most common in business, is task conflict. And that's really a disagreement about what you're trying to accomplish. You have a project, you come to loggerheads as to what the project is supposed to achieve. And so you have those particular conflicts. That's the most common in business. Then you have process conflict. Process conflict is trying to figure out, is a conflict about how something gets done. So it's not the what, it's the how. A very simple example is you're working with somebody, you're making a bed with your partner, and they say, well, we should start at the top. Start at the top. And you're like, well, I always start at the bottom. So that would be a very simple example of process.
Oh my God, it's so funny you use that as an example. Folding fitted sheets.
Yes. That is no two people do that the same. That is a great example of process conflict. You know, it's funny.
I have learned to just stand on the other end and hold my end of the sheets and let whatever happens happen.
Let the other person do whatever they want to do. It's the
Like,
best way to avoid that conflict. Very simple, but very, it's illustrative, right? The next one is less common, but status conflict. You
mm,
put a group of people on a project and they don't know who's in charge. So there's one person may think I should be in charge because I have more education. The other person thinks that they should be in charge because they have more experience. So, and it's the real reason for knowing the type of conflict is not so you're going to change the process or change how you deal with conflict. It's so you know what to focus on.
yeah.
So if it's interpersonal or relationship conflict, you can approach it from that lens. If it's task, you approach it from that lens, and so on. So that's the reason for knowing the different types of conflict.
I think that's really important. The more we can understand the environment that we're working in, or the factors that are at play, the better we will have a chance at actually preventing the escalation, right? So you use the example of status, and a group of people get together and they're fighting amongst themselves, trying to figure out who's in charge, or maybe or appropriately who's not in charge,
Mm-hmm.
so that no one has to take responsibility and be held accountable for something. So there's that, focusing on what's important there, right? And so and that's the case in each of the ones that you mentioned, is that if we can start with identifying what the landscape is, and then what's important, ultimately what it is we want to achieve in the process, then we can sort of chart a course that can eliminate a lot of the things around which we could start to argue and escalate, right? So you can have a difference of opinion, you can want to have a difference of approach. What's ultimately most important, and you said this, what are you trying to get at the other end?
Mm-hmm.
We get to choose. So one of the things that I would say is, if you choose for the organization to win, the group to win, right? That our goal is for this effort, this group to be successful. Then you can start to figure out the pieces that need to be negotiated so that you can create an environment and an attitude where everyone is working towards that end. And then you eliminate a lot of the reasons that escalation could happen.
Well, yeah, you start out by understanding that conflict can happen and just putting some parameters in place for when it does. But I think the other thing to realize is this is a very simple and when I say different types of conflict, it's like, okay, there are four types, right? It's a simple explanation, but in actuality it's not that simple, because
Right.
you can have a relationship conflict that started out based on task conflict.
Right. I was gonna say it could be combinations of those very, all
Absolutely.
for any combination, right?
So you need to know what the primary, what started the fire. I think, and then you can, you deal with the symptom first and you work backward so you can get to the root cause. And that's why it's important to understand these four different types of conflict, because you could be looking at a situation thinking that you're dealing with a relationship. Oh, they just don't get along. And focus on that, when it's really, when they started the project, you didn't tell them who was going to be in charge and how they should work through those things, or how they should work through those things. And so you want to make sure you get to the root cause and know that it could be, you don't want to have a looking at something and saying, okay, it's camouflaged, it's really something else, but you think it's this thing. So you really
Mm-hmm.
need to ask some really good probing questions when you're working through a conflict so you can find out what's the root that caused it.
I like it. I like it. So what, now that we have defined conflict, established that it is ever present, um, identified some types of conflict that can occur. This is for the benefit of you being aware, right? This is for awareness purposes. What are some strategies then?
Well, I think
to manage this.
I think the second thing is after you get through and understand what type of conflict you're dealing with, I think another thing is to know your conflict style, your primary conflict style. And I think, like with everything, and I say primary because you can be one way with some people and another way with other people. You're certainly not going to. So I'll tell you, I have 3 different ones. So the first one is the avoider. The avoider is someone who avoids conflict. They'd rather eat a plate full of their worst food that they hate than deal with the conflict because they don't like how it makes them feel. They feel nervous. They have behaviors that are not, they don't like to behave how they behave when they're in conflict. So those are the avoiders. They will usually handle a conflict if they have to, if they're backed into a corner, or if they're told that they have to handle it by their manager, then they'll deal with the conflict, right? They won't be necessarily very good at it because they spend a lot of time avoiding it. Then I have the second are the heat seekers. Those people, they are way too comfortable with conflict. They cause conflict because you'll know when you're dealing with one because everyone has a problem with them. So they like to blow things up like a heat-seeking missile. This is why I say, they're the heat seekers. So they have conflict with nearly everyone. So if you're one of those people, there's a lot more work that you need to do before you can get to the last one, which I call the diplomat. They are comfortable with conflict. They know it's going to happen. They understand, or they try to work through conflict in a way that benefits everyone, themselves and the other person. They may have been an avoider, but they start working toward being better at dealing with conflict. So those 3 are my 3 categories. So, and then after that, you can start.
Before you go into that, and I'm curious, is it possible to be situationally any or all of those, right? Because I can think of times where in certain situations or with certain people, right, in relationships with certain people, some people may be an avoider. With this happens a lot with parents, right? Or subordinates with their bosses, anything to avoid that. But then with a sibling or a coworker, you're blowing things up because you think you can't deal with or have, work things out somewhere else. And so you take that right to another situation or another relationship.
Absolutely. I think, I tend to think that's why I said primary, because I think that not everybody, most people are some combination of these things with certain people. Certainly I love to equate these things to relationships. Look at a couple that is a married couple that's getting a divorce. They certainly have that, heat seeker kind of mentality. They're looking for conflict a lot of times, not all the time. Some people can end their relationships very diplomatically. I think those are rare. I don't have the stats on that, but I would venture to guess that those are rare. But there are some people that when they've had enough, when you hear the phrase in your head, I can't with this person, you're probably going to try to blow up that relationship. But then that same person, when they meet with the CEO or they're or they're in a committee with people that have more status than they have. They're very diplomatic. They're very political. They don't want to do things that may harm their career or those relationships. And then you have, some, in certain situations where they know that person may be more intelligent than they are, or may have more experience than they do. And or maybe that person just is better at navigating difficult conversations. You don't want to get into a conflict with them, so you avoid that person, because you know that in that conversation you're going to be on the back foot and the end result probably won't benefit you. So you can be all three of those things at any given time with any group of people.
Okay, awesome.
So then the next thing is just really some very basic steps to deal with conflict. And I've used this, this is funny. And this is something that we talked about, and you said this at the top of the program. There's learning in all experiences. And I've learned the most, and I almost hate to say this, but I've learned the most in the jobs that were most difficult for me.
Yeah.
When I've had jobs that were, you wake up in the morning and go, oh, here I go again, or you're in a really rough, I've learned the most. And I worked in an organization where I had to do a lot of conflict mediation, and I got very good at it. And I got very skilled at dealing with conflict when it came my way. Now, I wasn't always successful in monitoring myself, because sometimes, as we talked about in the last episode, you get that amygdala hijack, and but I've gotten better at catching myself, and that job helped me do that. So here's some steps you can employ. First of all, and before I even get there, the very first thing is to know when a conflict is warranted. Sometimes certain things, you have to look, is it the time right now to engage in this conflict? Is it something that I really need to address? Really give that some thought. But then if you say that, yes, you need to meet it head on. Don't try to avoid it. Don't try to dance around it. I'm a musician, and early in my music career, when I found something I couldn't do, I would try to do everything I could not to do it. And then it would just come up again. So if you can't read music, learn how to read music. So it's one of those things. So meet the conflict head on. Then what you need to do when you're working with that person, agree on what you're trying to achieve by having the conversation. Ground rules really help. So have some ground rules, and one person shouldn't be coming up with the ground rules. They should be a joint effort. One person can come up with 2 ground rules. The other person can come up with 2 ground rules, or how you would like to do it. I try to have about between 5 and 8 ground rules. You don't want to have tons of them because they become very hard to remember. Some very simple ones. Don't interrupt when someone's talking. Very important. No name calling. If things get really hot, it may be appropriate to take a break. Decide on how long that break should be. Really important. Keep those ground rules. The second thing is model the behavior that you want to see the other person do. If you don't want that person to interrupt you, don't interrupt that person. If you don't want that person to, call you names, don't call them names. If you want that person to stay calm, stay calm. So you want to model those things and know what you're weakest at in those things. So if you have a hard time staying calm, you need to work on that. And there are a lot of different ways you can work on it. So you model those behaviors. And then when you're having the discussion, point out what you observed and what you heard, not the why you think it is behind it. This is what I've heard. This is what I saw. Don't say things like, I saw you do this, and I know you did it because you don't know why that person did it. I think what people get seduced into is because sometimes you may hit the nail on the head and know exactly why. Most of the time you will not. So you use that one time you got it right to justify saying it every single time. So, and these are mental models, right? So I know I got it right. I'm going to keep doing it. So only stick to what you saw, what you heard. Leave what you think the reason is out of. That's really important. And then what you want to do is I call them rapport building activities. You can call them communication skills. I just lump them in rapport building because they work in that situation as well. You want to listen, so you want to use your active listening skills. Then you want to paraphrase what you think you've heard, because you may remember there are filters that their message has to pass through. And that filter is all your past experiences with that person and with other people. So you want to paraphrase what you think you've heard. Then you want to make sure you validate their emotions. We talked about this before. People have a right to feel any way they want to. You cannot direct how they feel. You may not think they have a right. They have a right to feel any way they want to. So validate those emotions. Very simple phrases like, it's understandable that you would feel that way, or it's understandable that you would think that, or I can see how you would think that. Those are simple phrases. Then you want to ask some really good open-ended questions that will get you more detailed answers. And then I like to say, ask permission to share your point of view. Is it okay if I tell you what I see? I have to tell you, I've been using this for over 20 years. I have yet to have one person go, no, you can't tell me. Then again, I haven't used this with my family. That's a whole different show. But you ask for permission. Can I tell you what I'm seeing, or what I saw, or what I thought I saw? And they'll say yes, and then you can tell them. And so if you use these skills and work, and remember, modeling is really important, because if you start getting amped up, you start getting edgy, they're going to do it too. Remember, emotional contagion takes over, and people will feed off of the emotions that you're putting out.
Absolutely. Those are great steps, great strategies. They are very similar to what I came up with. I think one of the points that I think was really important that you made was the repeating back what you heard, what you saw, without ascribing motive, right? Without saying that this is why you did, because you're taking an escalated conflict, and now you're going to ramp it up even more, because our nature is, when we feel attacked, to be defensive and attack back, right? So that's one of those things, when you're calling out motives, you don't know why somebody did something, right? And this goes back to something that I've said repeatedly here, is that nothing has any meaning other than that which you give it. So when you're repeating that back, what you heard, what you saw, do it without interpretation of what it means, or what someone's motives were, what their why was, why they've done what they've done. Leave the interpretation out. You can repeat the facts, or you can say, this is what I think I heard or think I saw. Am I right? Or if you're going to call out motives, you should ask the question, what I thought you were trying to do was this, and then allow someone the opportunity to say it. I would say leave that out, but if you feel compelled, if you're hijacked, if you just feel compelled to have to bring that up, do it in a question. And then be honestly, authentically open to hearing the other person's response to that. And then the other thing I liked was about taking a break. Be okay with you. First of all, you don't have to resolve or manage the whole thing right now. And so if you feel yourself not being able to stay in control of yourself and of your emotions, be okay with taking a break. But don't just walk away. Don't just walk away or say, I'm done, or I can't with you, and walk away. Say, I think I've reached my limit for today. I've done as much as I can. Can we set a time and continue this conversation another time? And you may find that once you give yourself some time to cool off, that you can come back and actually work through what the issues are, right? And that everybody's got a point of view, everyone's got a perspective. You have to accept that other people's may be different from yours. I like that strategy. Is it okay if I share my point of view, or is it okay if I talk now? Right, asking the permission. I've not tried that. Well, I have said that, but in a slightly different way.
Yeah,
that probably didn't help the situation.
Wait, can I talk now?
Okay. I didn't ask you to call me out.
But it's really the other thing. And thank you for that, Whitnie. I've used these for many years, and it was a trial and error. For me, I had to stumble a lot and do a lot of research and try to find something that worked. And the other thing that I left off the list that can be very helpful, and we can add it here, is have the other person repeat back what they thought that you've heard. And I've come up with a way to do that. I didn't invent it, of course, but one of the things that I like to do, or when I show this to leaders and managers, I say, when you ask for that feedback, you want to do it in a way that puts the onus on you. So you can say, just to make sure that I've been clear to you, because sometimes I have this issue where people don't understand what I'm saying. Can you repeat back to me what you think I've said? So put the onus on yourself. Now, if you're having an ego issue with that, like I said, that's a completely other show. We talked about that already. But it's okay to do that, just to make sure that I'm being clear, because I'm nervous. Can you repeat back what you think you've heard me say? So that's also another technique that I've used in dealing with conflict, because sometimes, remember, when we get that hijack, when we are in those heightened states, we start to think our internal thoughts, and they start, they put up that mesh that filters what's coming in. And so you may miss critical things, or it's amazing what happens when you're in that fight or flight mode. I've heard things, and personally heard things and saw things that did not happen. I saw that face you made. Like, I didn't make a face. I just turned away so I could see this commercial, right? But you tend to filter things when you're in that mode.
That's funny. You say, I saw that face. You couldn't have. My back was turned.
Exactly. That's your brain using past experience and projecting it onto the experience that you're going through in the present. And that happens to a lot of us. You've seen it. There's that's psychotherapy talks about that all the time. People have these experiences where they start grafting their past on the present experience. And we do that. Everybody does that from time to time, to some degree. And I've done it. I've been in conflicts with other people where they're doing, I'm like, I haven't moved my hands at all. Like, I see what you're doing. I'm like, I'm not doing anything, but it happens. And so when those things happen, that's when it's really good to start modeling the behavior that you want the other person to exhibit. Go ahead.
And I was just going to say, and I think that's why it's so important to have some semblance of the outcome that you want to have, to have thought through. What do you want to come of this? Because your emotions and the opportunity for being hijacked throughout the process can take you in a lot of different directions. If you can, right, if this is not something that's happening in the moment, or if it is happening, not happening in the moment, meaning that you've got a pre-planned meeting or an opportunity, to go in with notes. And if this is something that's happening in the moment, to take a deep breath, gather yourself, and take the split second or a couple of seconds that it takes, if it's to say, we're moving down this path. What do I want at the end of this? How do I want this to go? Because the more you can think about that on the front end, again going to preventing the escalation, right? It's the goal is not to avoid the conflict, but to prevent the escalation so that you can work through it. And it's harder to work through something when you're emotionally charged, right? Because you're not necessarily thinking clearly, you're not thinking straight. And so make some notes, even if you have to say, could you give me a moment? And just jot down a couple of words that will help to keep you on track. And some of the things, remember the rules, no name calling, model the behavior that you want, right? Think about what it is you want on the other end of this. And the more you can stay connected to that, the easier it will be to keep from sort of blowing up and escalating something, so that you're just talking past each other.
Yeah, I think that it's so important. And to know what your tendencies are. I am a natural interrupter. I am the youngest of 7 children.
You're an interrupter?
I am an interrupter because I'm the youngest of 7. It's funny. The youngest of 7 children, and I had to always interrupt to be heard. And so I've taken that, and so when in conversations, I constantly work at not interrupting. And I do that in our program. And it's not because I'm not that, ooh, I got to say this, or I'm not going to get any credit. It's because if I don't say something, I'm worried I'm going to forget it. So I've gotten to the habit of writing things down. And that helps me. So, many times in our program, you'll see me, I'll just start writing things down because I just don't want to interrupt, because you have a great stream of ideas happening, and you're putting things together, and you're coming into this conversation with so much richness. I don't want to disturb that. And so I start writing things down. So that's what's helped me. But you need to know that about yourself.
Absolutely, which is the first component of the simple method, which is this self-awareness. And this is why self-awareness is so important. It can help you you need to understand your triggers, you need to understand your tendencies, so that you can work with them, right? Recognize when things are happening. And I do the same thing. You're talking and I'm like feverishly writing notes, because I know by the time you're done, I'm not going to remember a thought that I had of something you said, a couple of minutes ago. And I'm trying to stay engaged as a listener so that I can make sure that these are always opportunities for me to grow as well, right? And this is not just us coming to you, our audience, and like telling you what to do. I am constantly learning. Robert is, he's so brilliant, and every time you're laughing, it's true. We're talking, I'm making notes. I was like, oh, I could use that. I could use that.
Well, this
particularly on the personal side. It was like, oh, I could use that.
Well, it's really funny, Whitney, because it's funny that I appreciate the kudos, because let me give some kudos back to you. Because one of the things that really got me interested in focusing and honing my conflict skills was something I think you said on Facebook years ago. And I don't even know if you remember this. You said you wanted to have a poster, and no one steal this because it's Whitney's idea.
I wanted to have a what?
You want to have a poster, and it's a poster or something that said conflict in little letters plus avoidance equals big conflict in big letters. You remember that? And I said, that's brilliant. And that was one of the things. The other thing that you may not know is, prior to going to, getting my master's degree in the same program you did, I was thinking about getting a master's in conflict resolution. So
Okay.
that was part of my research. So I was really into this, and I was, because that was part of my job. And so at first I was going to do training with the Quakers. The Quakers, believe it or not, they have a lot of training in conflict resolution. So they have these, a lot of training classes that you can take. So for the audience, if you're out there, look to the Quakers. They have a lot of things with that. There are Abilene Christian University I believe it's Abilene Christian University has a master's in conflict resolution, and that's what I was looking at
Okay.
at that point. And then I decided to get my master's in organization development and leadership. But part of my job was to negotiate all these conflicts because I worked in a union environment. And so I started doing my research and training, and then coming up with the things that I shared today.
Okay. I love everything you've said. I think it's great strategies, very much in line with things that I would offer up. And so I would like to end with sort of this thought on silver linings. Right? What are the benefits? Right? There actually are some benefits to conflict. Right? Not necessarily the escalation, although there are lessons to be learned in the escalation. And I will own this. Every time I am in a situation where the conflict has escalated, I learn a little bit more about myself, right? As someone who meditates and is working to be ever present, what that reminds me of is that I still have lots of practice to do in being ever present, because for me, the escalation is about letting something get out of hand because I'm not paying attention to what it is I ultimately want, which for me in my life is to maintain peace in my life, right? Not peace in an avoidant way, but peace by working through things and being clear about what I want and how I want my relationships to work, and then doing the work to make that happen. So when I get loud, I'm a little on edge. Someone, I won't say who, but someone usually is like, "Why are you yelling?" I was like, "Oh." Why are you raising your voice? I was like, oh, okay, right. Because I'm not fully present and mindful of what I'm doing. And the hijack has started. And it's usually that pattern interrupter, right, that comes along. And my getting loud, my yelling, that escalation is my mental model with generally is about defending myself. Right. And so I working towards a place where it's like, you don't have to defend yourself. Your work, the who you are, your values, all of that stands on its own. You don't have to defend yourself. And therefore, there's no reason to get defensive and escalate. But I'm still working. I'm a work in progress. I am a work in progress. But that's one of the silver linings of this, right? Is the opportunity to gain some increased self-awareness, to be able to come back and stay in the moment. Another is better relationships with other people, with your friends, family, romantic relationships, work relationships. There is an opportunity to deepen those relationships, to be more vulnerable, to be more honest, to articulate what it is that you need. And a lot of what happens in our relationships, going back to one of the conflict types, is that we're not communicating what we want or need in those relationships, whatever the relationship. I'm not just talking romantic, right? We are not communicating what we want or need. We expect the other person to somehow know. So now we're holding them accountable for uncommunicated expectations. And that creates its own level of conflict. And so, being willing to share and communicate allows us to deepen our relationships, to have better relationships. I see you making notes. Did you want to say something?
No. I was just taking some notes because you said something that sparked a thought in my head. And here's the deal: the best teams have conflicts that they've managed successfully. If you put a team together and all they have is harmony, there's no creative tension there. There's no creative tension there. And they may work well, but you're not going to get innovation typically from those kinds of teams. You're going to get innovation from teams that have differences of opinion, differences in thinking. So remember that good things can come from conflict. And that's something that you said. Think of the civil rights movement. There was conflict before that.
Yes.
Think of, all these things that we enjoy now. Usually they started with some kind of conflict. The right to vote. There was, protests, union negotiations. Those are all conflicts.
Yes.
If we look at those things as beneficial, then we can have a lot better relationship with conflict.
And we won't seek to avoid dealing with the conflict, right? That becomes the point of the silver linings, is there's no point to avoiding it because there's some good that can come on the other side. You just have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and working through it. The other is that it allows us to grow in terms of expanding our worldview, our perspective, our personal points of view, right? When we take the time to listen, actively listen to what other people have to say and be open to where they're coming from, it allows us to grow. And we grow through what we go through. Not mine, but I thought I'd share it. And then there are lots of silver linings. I'm just going to share one more in the interest of time, is that it can help us make better decisions and develop a better decision-making process by, again, listening, being open and honest, being willing to look at how we see and think about things, and challenging whether or not that's the only way, the best way, or just one of the ways, right? And again, that's one of those things that creates the escalation of the conflict, is that we think our way is the best way. And it may be, but it may not be. And minimally, it is a way, right? Probably more likely 99.9999%, not the only way. It may be the best way, but it's not the only way. And to, constantly put your way out there and not give other people the opportunity to provide input, you're going to constantly have that agitation and aggravation between you and other people. So, be open to it. Those are just a few of the silver linings. If you have one or two you want to share before we wrap up.
No, I think you said all of them. I mean, those are some great ones. I love those. Just know that, like I said before, good things can come from conflict. Look for it.
Absolutely. So we want to thank you for joining us. And there was some conflict here, but it was all good, right? It's all good. We're growing every day. And so if there were some things that we've said that you don't agree with, we would love to hear from you. What is your perspective? What are your thoughts on this topic? I'm sure it's a topic we will come back to from time to time, especially when we see things in the news. That's what we're here talking about, things that are that can help you to be a better leader. You become a better leader by being a better person, by being more self-aware, purposeful and intentional about what it is you're doing, particularly as it relates to leadership. We are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. If there's anything that we can do to help you as a coach or as a consultant, please reach out. We would like to talk to you about how we can support you and your organization. So until next time, again, thank you for joining us for the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond, and take care.